Trove's combat and how you build classes can be broken up into 3 categories. Speed farming, where you're trying to complete dungeons as fast as possible, which means you need to have a class that has a good base movement speed and you will be sacrificing damage for more speed. Delves, which is a combination of damage and health. In most cases, you need to be really tanky to be able to survive the long, drawn-out gauntlet. And Leviathans are all about damage. You don't need to survive if you can kill it before it kills you. The efficiency of a class can basically be broken down into these 3 categories. Some will be stronger than others in one area and weaker in another. Another video of mine that I would recommend is the classes cheat sheet. It's basically a visual graph that kind of shows where each character fits in the spectrum. At the end of it all, I would always recommend that you play the class that you enjoy, rather than picking something specifically because it's efficient. So assuming you've picked out your main, let's get started with the more detailed tutorial. I'm a little bit surprised how often I say this, but Draco is yet another class that gets extremely underestimated by players. See, the class is extremely tanky, but it also has this passive buff where when you touch lava, you get a movement speed boost, which is very, very helpful in fire worlds. The crazy thing is if you end up having all of your movement speed buffs trigger at the same time as touching the lava, you can end up being one of the fastest classes in the game. Granted, you have to have lava nearby in order to have that trigger. But because of how tanky Draco is, it's a very, very good class for deep delves and boss fighting. But even with the whole little lava speed trick, it's not necessarily a very good class for speed farming. So the subclass ability as always is going to end up being kind of just the same as every other class. I would recommend using Solarian if you can, just because the extra light value as always is going to be invaluable. But otherwise, sort of crazy. Lunar Lancer's ability is pretty good just because anytime you end up getting the Giganto mode to trigger, you'll end up gaining movement speed as well as just more damage. I like using Mounted Cavalry, not because of the mount movement speed per se, but most of all the flask capacity, though the mount movement speed is very useful because the class doesn't have a very high base movement speed, so you are going to be fairly reliant on your mount. Stat priority you're going to focus on for all of your gear is going to, of course, be movement speed and crit damage. Because the class is not actually affected by attack speed, it means that you don't need to focus on getting it on the class, which means you can have optimal damage with the crit damage, but you can also just have that movement speed to help out. For Draco's Crystal Ring effect, there's going to be Dragon Force, which summons 2 Draco allies when using the ultimate ability. However, keep in mind that you can only have 6 babies at a time. It's just kind of the hard cap that the game gives you. Firestorm, which makes it so that your Spitfire, your right click, grants a buff that allows it to be freely used for a short time. That can be really good burst damage. But then also Dragonborn makes it so that when dodging, the Draco leaves behind a burnt offering, which is probably one of the worst options just because you're kind of what you're bottlenecked for your damage with the Draco is waiting for the animation of your character throwing the pot on the ground and then, of course, destroying it. So you could either use Dragon Force just because that'll get you to the most optimal damage quicker by having all of your babies and your ultimate at the same time, or you could go for Firestorm just because it will allow you to have a burst of damage for a very short time. If I'm being perfectly honest, this class doesn't have very good Crystal Ring effects. And I'm sure somebody who mains the Draco more than me, and more particularly who actually uses the Crystal Ring effects, can sound off in the comments and correct me. Now for the best banner and slot, generally speaking, it's going to be the Leviathan torches, the Permatorch obviously being the best, and I always craft it into the Saber Skull, just because it's the one that gives you not only the movement speed, but light, magic damage, and flask capacity. Keeping in mind, if you do have a Permatorch and you do forge it into another torch, you can always loot collect the torch and you'll get your Permatorch back. You just won't get the resources that you spent to upgrade it. Now you got 2 options for your best ally and slot. One is going to end up being the Mini Water Mana Beast, because this is going to give you just an outright abundance of extra damage, which from the hub is located down here in the basement where we've got the Mysticism Profession. And down in the collectibles, there's going to end up being the Water Beast right here for these resources. But for my money, I would go for Starry Skyfire because it's going to end up giving you that increased cooldown recovery speed, and a lot of the damage of the Draco hinges upon the ultimate ability, which from the hub is located over here at the star chart and is going to end up being this node right here, which you're going to have to get anyways because of the light. Speaking of the star chart, the nodes that you're going to be focusing on is the Life Leech node, which is going to make pretty much every class in the game almost invincible, the movement speed nodes, the light node, and the damage nodes, keeping in mind that I have my characters built towards physical, but you would go towards magic. Now for your flask option, pretty much any of these will end up working good for you, but generally speaking, I always like using Death Defying because I'm lazy and pretty much anything at the end game will almost certainly one-shot me. But since you're Draco, and Draco is a tanky boy, you could use Elysian Bandolier just to give you more flask capacity. Conjurer's Crucible because it'll trigger every time Magic Find triggers. Valorous is okay, but generally speaking, those are going to be the best options. As for the Flask Emblem, unfortunately, because of how tanky the end game enemies are in the game right now, you're gonna pretty much always be stuck using Arcane Emblem. You can't really swap it off at any point anymore. There was a point in time where we could swap off of it once upon a time, but that's irrelevant now. For your secondary Flask Emblem, though, you would end up using Sure Strike Emblem earlier on just because you need to have that extra crit chance. But as soon as you get your crit chance high enough, you could swap that out for Chromatic Emblem is probably going to be your best bet because once again, all of your damage is going to hinge upon the ultimate ability and all of your little Draco babies and stuff. But if you need survivability, which shouldn't happen much if you have the Life Leech node on your Draco, is going to be Unyielding Emblem, or if you're absolutely dedicated to using this one main class for just speed farming, then you're gonna want to have Trailblazing. For mid-game stats, and keep in mind that this is just kind of a ballpark estimate where you want to aim for and then move up from there, you're going to want to have 80,000 magic damage, 50 to 60% crit hit, and 700 to 800% crit damage. Again, this is just for like kind of a midpoint, and then you would just work up. Now, before we get into the gems, there's two things that I gotta bring up. One, are you level 30? Because so many people are always wondering, how can I make my character stronger? And then they don't even realize that they're not max level. Max level makes a huge difference because it'll allow you to equip gems to every single one of your slots, and gems gives you the most stats and PR in the game. On top of that, I am not doing a super coefficient video. As you can see, totally not a glitch at all. I'm at 0 coefficiency. But no, I want to make these videos as digestible as possible to you guys. I'll have a coefficiency guides like a little further down the line. So let's move on to the gems. We're first of all going to be talking about the colored lesser gems, not including cosmic. Those are their own category, but we're going to try and get 2 boosts magic damage, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit, and you're gonna do that on 3 of your colored lesser gems, and then the other 3 lesser gems are going to end up being 2 boosts crit damage, 1 boost magic damage, no boost crit hit. Whereas your empowered gems, you're going to aim for 2 boost magic damage, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit. And of course, as I mentioned, all of the cosmic gems, including the empowered, is just going to be all 3 boosts into light, with the additional stats being crit damage and magic damage. Keep in mind, once you get 100% crit hit, you can swap crit hit off of the gems for max health. As far as the empowered gem abilities, you definitely want to have the class gem ability. That's pretty much mandatory. And then you can use Pyro Disc for movement speed, Cubic Curtain for survivability if you want. I don't think Explosive Epilogue works on this class. Maybe it does, and maybe I'm just confused. The description is still pretty bogus after all these years. But otherwise, Spirit Surge can end up being okay as well, just because it's kind of a damage over time thing, and Draco's Flame is kind of damage over time. But generally speaking, we already know what the best gems are. And the Cosmic Empowered Gem, you're going to be going for either Vampirium if you're earlier on and need survivability, because it's going to give you life leech, but it also gives you a movement speed boost. But when you get more towards the later portion of the game, you're going to be using Berserk Battler, because it's basically going to boost up your light stat while you're fighting, which makes you deal more damage. Lastly, I did want to talk about something, because yeah, I actually had a friend of mine actually go out of their way to explain to me how the coefficiency works with Trove, and there's actually already some pretty good guides out there. So it's only a matter of time. Eventually I'll tackle a video focusing on the coefficiency of every single class, but you gotta consider that every single class has slightly different stats, which is why with these videos I try to make them as digestible and, you know, just consumer friendly as possible, because this way you can take these gems in any of these videos and cycle them between other classes. Whereas if you're trying to laser focus coefficiency on a certain character, you're going to have to spec the gems specifically to that character, and it makes the gems a lot less, like there's a lot less option to swap them around. That's my justification for it, because we've kind of already dedicated to these videos without focusing on coefficiency. I'm just saying that it's a matter of time and it's coming, okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, you can always smash like, subscribe, hit the bell button, all the other buttons, you know how it goes. And otherwise you can sound off in the comments of things that you think I needed corrected on, or just show support for Draco Power, because Draco's so good.